So Quelle Chris is a Mello Music Group rapper who last year dropped the Everything's Fine album with his wife, Jean Grey, and that album actually was really very good in my opinion. Made my year-end list, even if I don't love it quite as much as when it first dropped, it certainly solidified its place in that top 50 albums of the year, even if it is pretty close to the bottom of the list at this point. It was an indie rap album that had so much clever wordplay, great lyricism, a lot of good social commentary as well, and honestly for me, Jean Grey stole the show on that album. I think she brought out a better side of Quelle Chris, because I don't really love the album that came out in 2017, the Being You Is Great album, but when he teams up with Jean Grey, I think that was just a perfect combination for the album. And you can probably guess with what I've just said about me not being that big on Quelle Chris as a rapper, I'm also not really that big on this new album, Guns. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I don't like this album, I do like this album, but I just think there are just a few too many issues for me on this album that take me out of it a little bit. There's a few tracks on this album where there's this like clunkiness to them that just really messes with the flow of the song. Like some of the beats are kind of stiff, they're like snares, they're really hitting hard on the beats, but then like the instrumental is this like really kind of cliche 90s jazzy rap soulful sample that just doesn't really feel like it fits in the mix. And there's Quelle Chris's voice that sometimes just kind of sounds too buried to the point where you can't really understand what he's saying, and he's a rapper that does have really clever wordplay and says a lot, and you should really read into what he says because he's a really smart guy, but he slurs his words a bit sometimes when he's rapping, and even when he's at the forefront of the mix, sometimes you really have to read into the lyrics because you can't fully grasp what he's saying, but when he's a little buried, it's even worse. Perfect example of what I'm saying here is Wild Minx, where that sample that kind of gets thrown in just feels completely out of place. It sounds sloppy, sounds kind of generic honestly as well for the genre. Guns is a track that just has a bit too much going on. It sounds a bit busy. There's not really a great flow to the track that kind of keeps you invested in what Quelle Chris is saying, sorry. And he's always saying something interesting, but just when these tracks don't sound too great, it really does take you out of it a little bit. I like the whole album's like this. I mean, Mind Your Business is just a fucking great track. I love his vocals on the chorus. He can be so animated and wacky at times that you just can't help but fall in love with his style. I think when this unique style comes out of him, he really shows that he's not just any old rapper. He's not just any old indie rapper who's on the Mello Music Group label. He has something to bring to the table, and I just kind of wish more of that came out a little bit. I do think his influences come out a little bit in an obvious way sometimes. I think there's a bit of an MF Doom influence on a track like PSA Drugfest 2003. Bit of Mad City, Kendrick Lamar I think comes out on some tracks, and there's even one track where his flow reminds me quite a bit of Saba from the Care For Me album, which I don't know if it's just my mind taking me there, but yeah, there's a few lines he comes out with on the track Guns that do remind me a little bit of Saba. But when he throws out those money motherfucker business, it's definitely proving that he's not just anyone else. I've already mentioned that lyrically he's always superb. Across this album he's pretty much touching on social issues, a lot of problems in regards to obviously guns, with the album being named Guns, but not only that, but like racism and stuff like that. There's even one track that references homophobia. And while that's all interesting stuff, I just kind of wish he sounded a bit more invested in what he's saying throughout. Like a lot of the time he's really just hitting out with the same monotone deadpan delivery that it kind of just gets really monotonous throughout the album, and it just doesn't really shake things up or keep you entertained really. For me, it's like the last few songs on the album where I feel like he starts hitting his stride a little bit, like he's throwing in, you know, some hooks, a bit of singing. The instrumentals sound a bit more crisp, a bit cleaner, and they're actually the better songs for me on the album. There is Obamacare, which is a clear-cut banger of the album, which totally calls back to Really Dough by Danny Brown and you know, Kendrick Lamar, Absol, Lil Sweatshirt. The beat is very much similar to that, which again brings me back to my point about how his influences are kind of pretty obvious at times. But even a track like Straight Shot actually reminds me of those like softer, more delicate sounding songs that came from Everything's Fine, because I really like his singing here. It's got a beautiful sample throughout. The vocals are just really gorgeous. Him changing it up and doing something different like this actually works really well in his favor. Jean Grey doesn't offer a rap verse on this track, but she does. Jean Grey doesn't actually offer any rap verses on this song, but she does do some wonderful singing on the bridge, and I just think the track comes together in a really nice way. Then the album ends off with Will You Remember Me, which is Quelle Chris talking about how he's not entirely sure if he's going to be remembered in the future. Is he just going to be another rapper who gets forgotten or something like that? Which I like this idea of when musicians play with the idea of fame. And this last little leg of the album did get me thinking about the theme of the album. Are these tracks alluding to the idea that he's this character who's being killed or like shot by a gun, and this is him talking, you know, beyond the grave, speaking as a ghost, saying like, will I be remembered because now I've been shot dead at such a young age, something like that. But I don't really think there's any kind of reference to this in the lyrics. It's more just me making up some kind of theory about the ending of the album. But even still, these are great tracks to end off the album. I just think the whole album, you know, from front to back doesn't stay in this consistent quality for me personally. I mentioned a lot of my issues with this album throughout the review, so it ends up all rounding off at about a 6 out of 10 for me. It's still good, it's still a solid album. Definitely think this will end up being a critically acclaimed rap album by the end of the year. I'm sure you ended up disagreeing with a lot of what I said throughout this review, but I hope you enjoyed what I had to say anyway. You enjoyed me speaking my opinion for whatever it's worth. Thank you for watching my review. Have a good day. Comment below with your thoughts. Listen to the album if you haven't already, because it's definitely worth your time. Goodbye. Subscribe. Goodbye.